Well, hello again, boys and girls. Welcome back to Mr Mousey Beyond the Silver Sea, an adventure with Mr Mousey and Mr Rabbit. And where we got to? Well, Nogger has just let out the fact that Descalidor is guarded by 10,000 Descali soldiers. So, and they're going to be trying to do a rescue of some sort. Well, we'll have to see what happens in chapter 24, The Wall. Descalidor is both a country and the capital city of that country. Most of the population live to the south, leaving the vast tract of what they call their northern reaches more or less uninhabited. The Descalis are a warmongering people, a threat to most of their neighbours. Their own security is assured by the massive walls and defences that are common to all their towns and cities, and also the massive armies that they keep stationed near their borders. Not normally a sea-going people, they do have some ships, the purpose of which is to generally rob and attack other, weaker, smaller peoples. Now, it was one of these that Prince Pilak had commanded when he boarded Nogger's old ship. As for the city Descalidor, no thought was given to watching its northern approaches. This they see no need to defend because of the terror of the forest. In fact, the forest is a place of terror to Descalis as well. Many stories have been told of people wandering in, never to return. The forest is a regular nighttime scary story around Descali campfires, and soldiers rarely enter in less than platoon strength, even then only when absolutely necessary. Now, it was down through this that the trio were quietly making their way, and perhaps because of their very stealth that no Descali soldier could hope to copy, this was how they had got so far. The land had been gradually rising all day. The river had long changed to a trickle before disappearing altogether when they came to its source, and they continued on a woody plateau for some hours before once again the ground gradually began to fall, and they were coming down the other side of what had been a long, low hill in the forest. Before them the trees had thinned a bit to more like an ordinary wood, and they found themselves within an hour's walk of the truly massive city unfolding in the plain not far below. From here its massive, impressive strength and power could be seen. It was surrounded by a defensive wall with several gates allowing entrance, and within the walls the stone buildings were clearly visible. Close to the wall, nearest to them, a massive tower rose high in the air, higher than the forest on which the tower looked down. Nogger could barely see the outline of the city, but the rabbit and the mouse knew they were looking at their goal. "Well, if she's in that," said Mr Rabbit, pointing up with a piece of grass that he had been chewing on, "then easy peasy lemon squeezy is not the first thing comes into my mind." "What?" exclaimed his friend. "Mr Dragon Slayer thinks getting over a wee wall and up a 200-foot tower while beating off 10,000 soldiers isn't easy?" He laughed and grinned at the rabbit, who grinned back. Nogger marvelled at these two fearless creatures who seemed to be able to take on the whole of the known world. Now, it might be worth pointing out at this time just how Mr Mousey was actually feeling. Up to now his plan had simply been for them just to try to get to the tower and rescue the princess. He hadn't really any idea how they would do this. Actually, he hadn't any idea at the minute at all. From a distance, it had looked like they were up against a single tower sticking up in the forest. Now it was obviously a lot more complicated. For the first time in their long journey, Mr Mousey couldn't see what next to do, and he seriously doubted if he would. They sat on the grass, peering through the trees to the scene below. "So, what then?" asked the rabbit. "Can we fly over? Is the carpet working yet?" "I don't think so, but a good idea. It's worth finding out," nodded Mr Mousey. The carpet was untied and placed on the ground. It didn't take long to find out. The carpet was working perfectly well as a normal carpet. That is, you could stand on it, you could walk about on it, but nothing else was happening. "Dead as a sucked out grape," said Mr Rabbit, shaking his head. Well, that was a new description to Mr Mousey right enough, but nonetheless true enough. They turned and looked again at the city beyond. Maybe we could just walk in backwards?" asked Mr Rabbit, who was trying to be helpful. "Then, when the guards see us, they'll think we're leaving and say nothing. Also, they'll not know who we are anyway, since they won't be able to see our faces." Mr Rabbit wasn't much of a plan maker, and it was obvious to all that he had just thought of another plan that proved it. "No, I don't think that would work, Mr Rabbit. But if you do think of another one, just say so." Mr Mousey was always kind to his friend. "Actually, I do," offered the rabbit. "What if you run in and fight the Descalidor thingers and rescue the princess while Nogger and I wait here and make a cup of tea in case you need a wee rest when you get back?" "It seems very unlikely that I would come back," sighed Mr Mousey, sensing his friend's plans were getting considerably worse than usual. "Oh, but I've thought of that." "You have?" "Yes, if you don't come back, Nogger and I would drink your tea as well." The rabbit's triumphant look on his face showed he thought he had come up with a corker of an idea, and Mr Mousey saw it was about time he thought one up himself before Mr Rabbit thought up any more. The keeper of the North Gate House, Sergeant Hack, was a particularly nasty piece of work. He had once been in charge of the southern gates, a much better job, and one at which he had collected a good daily sum of money for himself in bribes from the traders who had to use that entrance. They complained, of course, but who would listen or care? Meanwhile, he went on lining his pockets with silver pieces. After all, he would ask himself, how else is a sergeant to get his necessities if he can't tax a little from the fat, wealthy merchants? It's not as if they need the money. Well, his necessities mainly consisted of dark brown bottles which he would buy from the city wine cellars and with which he would spend long hours consuming in the darkness of the gatehouse. When he disappeared with his bottles into his hideaway, his men would groan and dread what was sure to happen when he emerged. Much later, when he staggered out again, his mood was always foul, and someone would always suffer at his rough hand. So it was that he overstepped the mark when one day he taxed a particularly wealthy-looking merchant by confiscating some of the wine he carried under wraps in his carriage. The visitor to the city had made to complain, but instead something about under his breath about, I'll get this sorted higher up. Higher up turned out to be the city lord of Descalidor, who was awaiting his delivery of fine wine from the grape fields of southern Descalidor. Shortly afterwards, the sergeant found himself transferred to the North Gate duty, where almost the only users of the gate or soldiers, or the odd delivery of building materials or wood. His taxing days were over, and his mood was worse than ever. His main interest now was ensuring that the men under his command were at least as miserable as he, and to achieve this he would prowl around giving pointless commands or tasks he knew were hated by those he gave them to. "You!" he screamed at a guard standing duty outside the gatehouse. What made you think? What do you think you're doing, man?" Guarding the gatehouse, sir." "Why, you imbecile, do you think it's going to run away?" No, sir. I mean, you told me." "Be quiet! Did I give you permission to speak?" "No, sir." "Then don't. Now go and march around the prisoner's tower, and don't stop until I order you to. Do you understand?" "Yes, sir." "Silence! You speak when I say. Now get going, and for your insolence, your leave is cancelled for tomorrow." Wasn't a nice man. Firewood collecting duty was particularly hated by the soldiers on the north gate. This was because it meant going up into the forest of darkness, a place no Descalidor went without good cause. Firewood teams never went in far because of the real threat of not returning. Stories still circulated of the ill-fated Sergeant Hadim, who had gone in with 6 of his men a few years previously. The guards on the wall later reported seeing flashes of flame and smoke rising up through the trees. They recounted hearing horrible cries of terror, but no man returned to tell the tale of what had befallen them. Sergeant Hack enjoyed sending in firewood teams. He enjoyed announcing his intentions and watching the faces of the men who had been ordered to go and collect firewood, trying not to look afraid. Those who twitched the most were the ones he would select. He checked the woodpile at the side of the gatehouse, noting it was well stocked and in no need of fresh logs. It was approaching the end of summer and still quite warm at nights, so very little wood was required. However, it seemed to the twisted sergeant a perfect time to collect wood in the forest. Not that he had ever gone himself. He had no intention of ever setting foot in the forsaken place. Now, which one of my men fear the forest most of all? Oh, Batman. "I think," said Mr Mousey, "that we should take a closer look at the city to see if there's a way in." He had been thinking hard for some minutes, and nothing else was coming to mind. "At least we'll have a better idea what we're up against." "What about our packs?" asked Mr Rabbit. "If we're going to do a bit of sneaky beaking, maybe we should hide our packs around here somewhere, or leave someone to look after them," he added, hopefully. "Good old Rabbit, that is right," agreed his pal. "Nogger, would you mind?" Well, unlike Mr Rabbit, Nogger wanted to be included and felt disappointed at the suggestion. "Well, if he really thinks so, I suppose. You see, the thing is, you still have your cutlass, and what I'm asking you to do is dangerous, I know, but it is important to have our things well guarded." Well, this put a different slant on it, and Nogger felt a lot happier as he agreed. "Oh, well, I'll do my best. Nothing will get by old Nogger without a fight." "Good on you, Nogger. Didn't we do well to bring a real-life pirate with us, Mr Rabbit?" Mr Rabbit merely nodded. "Right, come on. Nogger will be back in about an hour. And if we're not, the 2 handcuffed animals waving at you from the tower will be us," said Mr Rabbit, who thought that was likely enough. As the 2 slipped away silently through the trees, 3 other figures, carrying axes and pulling a handcart, made their way up the gentle incline toward the forest. "I'm telling you, the woodpile is piled high. He only sent us for his own twisted sense of humour," said one of these people. The tallest of these three agreed. "He's right, all right. If we never return, it would give him a week of laughing himself to sleep at nights, thinking of ways we might have been eaten or crushed by giant snakes or sucked dry by vampires." "Oh, be quiet, you two. If we can cut some logs as quick as possible and get out even quicker, it'll make me a lot happier," said one of the soldiers who had a hooked nose. They never saw the two creatures flit by to their right and heading down a gully in the forested hill. The two creatures, the mouse and the rabbit of course, were so focused on being quiet and invisible that they missed the three soldiers altogether and had no idea they had passed them. Back up the hill, Nogger had found a hollowed out, fallen down tree trunk. It was warm and dry inside, with plenty of room to stash the two rucksacks and with space still left for himself to crawl in and rest safe from prying eyes. "There," he declared to no one in particular, "snug as a bug in a rug. Now old Nogger'll have 40 winks as'll do him no harm at all, eh?" Within seconds, he was fast asleep. After walking a few more minutes, one of the soldiers' hooked nose stopped. "Far enough. Let's get this over with." The axes were soon working, the noise making the three wish there was a quieter way of chopping wood. "We'll never get this all done with all this garb on us," said the shortest soldier. They were all wearing the armour and helmets that was the common uniform to Descalidor, and it was not suited to hard work in a forest. Seeing they were out of sight of the North Gate house, they all stripped to their leather waistcoats and cotton trousers and resumed chopping. Now within 500 yards of the city walls, Mr Mousey and Mr Rabbit could see that if they were going to get in, it would not be by climbing the walls. They were gigantic, at least 40 foot high, and rendered smooth with plaster. Not a foothold could be seen. The two friends were huddled behind a bank with only a few yards of trees left before an open gap between the forest and the city. "And so close," whispered the little mouse, nodding up towards the tall tower dominating the skyline. He reckoned it could be no more than 100 yards inside the city wall to the tower. Only a third of a mile away, and yet it may as well have been 1,000 miles. "What does the book say?" whispered Mr Rabbit, pointing to the satchel over the mouse's back. Now Mr Mousey had brought the book intending to consult it at just this point, hoping it would give a further hint to the way ahead. Opening it up, he turned to a new chapter. Chapter 7, The House in the Woods. Scanning through it quickly, Mr Mousey saw that it concerned their stay in the little stone house. The next chapter was more promising. The Tower. It was entitled and showed a full picture of the tower behind the wall. Following with his finger, Mr Mousey began to read the newly arrived words. The tower had stood even before the city had been built. Its original purpose had long been forgotten, and the new masters simply used it as a prison. The mouse and the rabbit could see that getting in would not pose a problem. Getting out, however, would take more than disguise. "What does that stupid book know?" whispered Mr Rabbit. "Getting in not a problem, I mean to say." He looked firmly at the pages held by the mouse. "You are a stupid book, do you know that?" Mr Rabbit was disgusted. Mr Mousey was thinking, "I think we should head back now before Nogger gets worried about us." "I'm already worried about us," muttered Mr Rabbit, mostly to himself. Well, Nogger wasn't actually worried about anybody, but his dreams were becoming a bit odd. A tremendous drum was banging away somewhere, and he couldn't work out what it was. The banging was getting louder and louder, and it seemed to bear no connection to his dream, which was about sailing on the open sea and fighting baddies. "Here's a log that only needs chopped in two," said the taller soldier, who had wandered over a bit and found a large log lying on the ground. "Well, why don't you hurry up and chop it up then? All this racket we're making would wake the dead," said Hook-Nose, who immediately wished he hadn't mentioned the dead. As his fellow soldier began chopping, he thought he saw a movement at the end of the log. Nogger awoke and found the noise deafening. Also, dust was falling all around him from the blows to the wood. He went to shout out to whoever it was to quit it, and got a nose full of sawdust. "Woody, achoo!" He let out an almighty sneeze and half a yell at the same time, and a great puff of wood dust and leaves erupted out of the end of the hollow log. At the same time he pulled himself out of his hidey hole and emerged covered in yellow dust and leaves. What the three soldiers heard and saw was greatly exaggerated, what with their imaginations already set to very high. Some dreadful creature had been disturbed from its sleep, and without doubt was going to kill and eat them, or even worse, eat and kill them. The first glimpse they had of a leaf-covered monster emerging in a puff of smoke was all they needed. With one accord they dropped everything and ran screaming back downhill towards the city. "Listen, do you hear something?" said Mr. Rabbit as he and his friend walked quietly back to where they had left Nogger. They stopped to listen, but before Mr. Mousey had a chance to reply, 3 men burst out of the bushes before them, screaming in a hideous fashion and flailing their arms like windmills as they hurtled towards them. Mr. Mousey immediately dropped to one knee and fumbled to undo his cutlass. Mr. Rabbit turned and ran, giving a good scream himself. Well, Mr. Mousey hadn't yet managed to release his weapon when the 3 flew by, not appearing to take any notice of him at all. They looked very frightened indeed. Now, Mr. Rabbit was fast, very fast, but the 3 behind him were running on pure terror, and it is a great fuel for putting an extra dose of speed into a pair of legs. There came a point when Mr. Rabbit found himself flanked by 3 half-dressed, screaming Descalies, and his own screams seemed pretty, poor in comparison to theirs. They seemed to take no notice of him, and as he slowed, their pace never decreased, and they overtook him as they sped downhill. Jogging along, he gradually slowed to a stop, and paused to consider what exactly he was running from. Rather sheepishly, he turned and made his way back uphill to find Mr. Mousey looking in his direction. "Ahem," said the rabbit, clearing his throat. Just getting a bit of exercise there." It didn't sound even close to a good excuse, but until something better came along, he decided it would have to do. "Now that was strange," said Mr. Mousey, still looking down in the direction of the departed soldiers. "Exercise?" asked Mr. Rabbit. "What's strange about exercise?" No, those men. "Oh, yes, that. They seemed to be having a good bit of exercise too, didn't they?" "I don't think exercise was part of their plans," replied the mouse thoughtfully. I suppose not. But they were good at screaming though, weren't they?" "Nogger is up ahead," said Mr. Mousey, turning and starting uphill. I hope he's all right." The mouse and the rabbit cautiously moved up the hill, looking and listening as they went until they came to the spot where they had left the pirate. They both gave a start as an object they at first took to be an old tree stump moved and spoke, sounding exactly like Nogger. "Oh, hello, mateys. Did either of you happen to see something just then? Only something woke me, it did, and I just can't figure out what it was." Lying on the ground were 3 sets of soldiers' armour, plus some weapons. It was a mystery, but seeing the cart and the wood, they put 2 and 2 together and came as close as makes no difference to working out what had most likely happened. Looking around at the things left behind, Mr Mousey suddenly realised he had found an answer. Ha! Well, that's the end of that chapter. So maybe they've found a way. Maybe Mr Mousey's working out a plan of how they can get back into the city. But we'll need to find out in the next chapter. Thanks for listening, boys and girls. I hope you enjoyed that. And you take care and God bless. Until next time. Bye bye.